Hey guys, how's it going? So I hope you're having a good day today, and I hope all is well with you. So for today's video, we're going to do another radio story. And for today's radio story, we're going to talk about 1310 The X in Detroit, Michigan, which aired from 2002 till, I want to say about mid-2004, when they became Air America. But the 1310 signal in Detroit has quite a storied history, and I won't go into too much depth, but I'll kind of skim through the history of the station up until when we're going to talk about 1310 The X. So the station signed on as WKMH in the early 1950s, which featured a full-service format. Full service, some adult music, kind of your typical early 50s kind of radio station. Then around 1960 or so, they became WKNR, which was Keener 13. And this was probably the signal's most popular format. Keener was one of the most popular stations in town, and it competed really well with a lot of other top 40 stations at the time. But then CKLW, AM 800 CKLW started becoming more popular, and then that kind of took some wind out of Keener's ratings. And then I think it was about 1970 or so, Keener 13 signed off. And then they became a full-time simulcast of 100.3 WNIC. Now, 1310 and 100.3 in Detroit were always kind of a package deal together through most of their existence. So, the station kind of went in and out of simulcasting WNIC over the years. So anyway, throughout the 70s, they simulcasted WNIC a good bit. Then they broke away from the simulcast, and they tried to revive the Keener 13 format under the call letters WWKR. As I believe WKNR was already taken by another station in Cleveland, which still has those call letters to this day. The Keener the second time around wasn't successful, so they went back to simulcasting WNIC. In the mid-80s, they became WMTG, which stood for Motown Gold, and they had like a satellite-fed urban oldies format. And then that ended up, I think it was like about 1995 or so, 1994. That gave way to a kids format, which was Radio AHS. And then the call letters were changed to, I think it was WDOZ, which I'm not sure what that stood for. But nevertheless, they aired a kids format, and then that went under, and this is kind of where things start becoming interesting. I think they went back to simulcasting WNIC, and then a local group entered a LMA, or local marketing agreement, with Clear Channel at the time, which is now iHeartRadio. And the guy heading this project, and I think I'm getting his name right, and if I'm screwing this up correctly, correct me. I think the guy's name was Bob Hines, and basically the idea was to try to bring back something like, to create a radio station like WJR was, like back in the 60s and 70s and 80s. So the station became WYUR, 1310 WYUR, your station. And it was an attempt to recreate like a recreation of WJR back in its heyday, with more of a full service kind of format. Like they aired talk, they aired music, and in fact they were airing classical music at night after WQRS 105.1 had flipped to the edge. And it was a very ambitious project, and it was a neat idea, but the station didn't make any money. And things just didn't work out. There just wasn't enough of an audience for it. People really weren't tuning in. I think 1310 signal had somewhat to do with it. And once you get a station in a market like WJR, that's in WWJ for that matter, that's firmly cemented, it's going to be hard to break people away from that. So WYUR ended, and the station once again simulcasted WNIC for a while. And then shortly after, they became 1310 The X as a sports format. They were airing Fox Sports, I think, like 24/7. Now, this move confused me a little bit because if I recall, by this time, Clear Channel had already owned WDFN 1130. So them having two sports formats always struck me as kind of weird. Maybe the idea was to have like a flanker station, or maybe the idea was to air sports on two stations to ward off a competitor. I'm not sure. But Fox Sports full-time lasted about 2 years, which brings us up to the story I want to tell. So 1310 The X shifted to talk in early 2002. And they were clearly trying to take WJR on. I mean, I'm positive I'm sure they were sure that they weren't going to, take a big chunk out of WJR, but if they could be like a proverbial stone in the shoe to them, maybe that was kind of the goal. And it was to clear probably a little bit of syndicated programming too, perhaps. So anyway, they became The X, and the 1310 The X was a mix of kind of conservative and progressive talk. So they aired Glenn Beck on middays. I can't recall who they had in the mornings, but then they had Dave Barber, and then they had a guy named Tony Trupiano, and then I think after Trupiano's show, I think it was Fox Sports, from about 6 to 6 a.m. if I remember right. But the hours that I was listening to the station was mainly during the day. So anyway, the main two shows I was listening to was Dave Barber and Tony Trupiano. Now, Dave Barber, that was one of the funniest talk show hosts I think I've ever heard in my life. I listened to his show as much as possible. Some of his rants were just classic. Like one time, he was just going on and on about people picking through his garbage and saying that was his property until the garbage man came and picked up the garbage. And he had people calling in there, and they were like, no, once you put it out to the curb, you've essentially surrendered it. He's like, no, I don't want anybody picking through my garbage and picking through my stuff and picking through my personal property. I mean, it was just so ridiculous. I was just laughing so hard at it. And Barber really didn't think much of Governor Engler too much. Of course, John Engler was governor of Michigan from 1991 to 2003. And I remember when Jennifer Granholm became governor of the state, he was like all happy, isn't she a nice looking woman? It's so nice not to have the Pillsbury Doughboy there anymore. Which is what he used to call John Engler. And yeah, he was just going off about that one day, and it was pretty hilarious. I mean, some of his topics were funny. His way of doing talk radio was really good, and that was just a really good show. Then they had another. Then, if I recall, there may have been another, I want to say there was may have been another show at first, but the one I remember after it was Tony Trupiano. And that was, and Trupiano was a pretty liberal guy. This was a little bit before Air America, but a lot of progressive-minded people were trying to get into talk radio at the time to counterbalance the right-wing balance, and I think that's why they brought Tony Trupiano on. Now, both Barber and Tony Trupiano were part of the I believe it was called the Michigan Talk Radio Network, which is now defunct. But it aired on, I'm sorry I'm jumping around here, but I believe those shows aired on a couple different stations around the state of Michigan, and one of them was 1310. But anyway, getting back on topic, Tony Trupiano was a pretty liberal guy. He was very much pushing for John Kerry to be president, and he was, you know, he really held Bush and George Bush and Dick Cheney and the Bush 43 administration in pretty low regard. So essentially, basically, he was acting as a counterbalance, like to Rush Limbaugh. At the same time, and this is a nationally syndicated host now, Joe Pags was starting to get into talk radio, and Pags had previously been a newscaster, and he had been in Michigan for a number of years. And then he left Michigan to take a job in New York State. And in New York State, Joe was starting to break into talk radio, and he had a show, I can't remember if it was in Rochester or where it was, but at the time he had a show there, and then he was airing his show on 1310 as well, and that was years before he went national. But 1310 kind of acted in his transition from TV news to a conservative talk show host. And he may have been on in the evening, I'm not sure. I believe that 1310 was still airing Fox Sports at night, but I believe they added Pags' show later. But the station was kind of a neat mix, and it was actually refreshing, and it was actually something kind of actually different to listen to than a lot of the same stuff you got on some, on some other stations. But like a lot of other boy, I'm having trouble today, aren't I, guys? But like a lot of other formats that 1310 tried, the X really didn't make much of an impact in the ratings. So they shifted the station to Air America around, I think, late summer of 2004 or so. And then, of course, they were Progressive Talk for some years until the station was donated, and the station went off the air for a few years, and then the station came back as a Spanish language format, which it currently is today. So guys, am I getting my history of 1310 right? Are my recollections correct? Did any of you guys listen to 1310 The X when they were talk? I'd love to hear from you. Well, guys, that's going to do it for me. I want to thank you so much for watching. Be sure to hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already. And as always, guys, have a great rest of your day.